And this is a program that I put together recently for an event that I was asked to come and present at. And as I started putting this thing together, I realized, shoot, this is about me, really. So, gardening as we age. And what I hope that we'll be able to cover today is, first of all, recognizing that gardening is still a needed for many people and an important way to get exercise and to continue to be involved outdoors and doing things outdoors. But then realizing and maybe just coming to terms with, coming to grips with the fact that maybe the way we always used to do things isn't going to always work as we get older. And so I've just kind of put together a few slides. This is a relatively short presentation, but I just get us thinking about some things and also show you some of the resources that I think might be very helpful to you that you may not be aware of. Okay, so let's just jump in. Why gardening? Gardening is just a simple thing. It's a simple thing that you can do. It's an enjoyable activity. And I'm always shocked when I hear people say things like, well, I just can't garden. I have a brown thumb and I'm not very good at this. So if brown thumb was a term that we could apply to car mechanics, then I would say I'd have a brown thumb. If it's something we could apply to woodworking, I'd have a brown thumb, right? Of course you have a brown thumb. If you aren't experienced at it, if you haven't researched and studied and learned, and sometimes learning just from experiences, yeah, it does seem a little bit overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. And it's nothing that can't be learned. And that's regardless of whether you have been gardening since you were a child with your parents or your grandparents, or whether this is something you just got into right after retirement from a school system or something, right? That you now decided you have more time and you want to do gardening. Regardless of how you get there, spending time in the garden is very helpful for all people, but especially as we age, and has a lot of benefits to us. We're gonna look not real in depth, but we want to highlight a little bit about physical health, as well as mental and cognitive health, and our social health as those relate to gardening. And so, one of the things I'm trying to look over here, I'm sorry, I'm looking off screen for a second, but one of the things that was reported in one of the journals that I cited for this presentation is that people who spend time tending their gardens, working in their garden, we don't have any parameters about what size that is, how big of a garden we're talking about here, but just tending their gardens tend to be more optimistic. They tend to be more physically active and healthy compared to those people who don't spend any time in the garden. That's very, very important, especially as we're getting older and as seniors. Some of the challenges that we end up having to face, like maybe more isolation, if you are retired from a workplace where you see people every day, and now it's just you and a spouse, or maybe it's just you at home, it's very easy to be isolated more so from other people. But gardening is one of those ways that we can reduce isolation, especially when you're gardening together. Reduced mobility. So as muscles get sore, backs get stiff, as long as we're being active and doing things, we can help reduce some of those mobility issues. And also cognitive decline. I've got a little bit more details, and I will say from the beginning, I am definitely not an expert at these types of things. I just want to share what I've learned doing some research about as we age in gardening, especially as it relates to these three things today. So what do some of the studies show? This first one, and I pulled these from all over. So the first couple that I'll give you, and some of the other examples aren't even from the United States, but I think that they're very helpful, and I think that some of the information that's presented in those research articles, and these are peer-reviewed journal articles, not just something from a magazine. This is from the University of Edinburgh, and it showed that participants ages 11 to 79 who spent time gardening showed greater lifetime improvement in cognitive ability than those who either never did or rarely did. So we're talking about memory recall, right? Being able to recall past memories and just having a less loss of memory. That's important. So why is that? Well, there's maybe some other reasons, but really just being involved in doing things and that ongoing learning and putting ourselves to a task is part of that too. So that's an important reason, I would say, that it helps reduce memory loss. Another thing that came out of this study, sorry, this is a separate study, and I think this is kind of an important thing too, is that we have a reduced risk of heart attacks, cardiac arrest among subjects who perform gardening activities for at least an hour a week. That is not a lot of effort, an hour a week, to get that type of exercise. But for a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too, this is about the only exercise I get. I don't go to the gym. Maybe I should be. We probably all should be. But I do work in the yard, prune trees, mow the yard, those types of things. And so this is an important thing for your overall health and helping to be more active. I will say this study was from the Journal of Women's Health, I think is the name of that. I'm trying to see my reference here. So this study is specific to women, but I think that we obviously know there's some benefit for that. Another one is yard work is a strong predictor of bone density. And this study is here in the United States. They actually compared several different types of physical activity that people do. And the other one that fits into this category besides yard work was weight training. So lifting weights. I'm sure it's not like huge barbells, but just doing some weight training. Those individuals who reported doing weight training or reported doing yard work had a stronger or more positive bone density health, which is important as we're getting older, because with less bone density, we're more likely to break hips, shoulders, whatnot, if we were to fall, wrist, those types of things. So I think those are important studies to kind of that play into why we want to continue gardening as we get age. One more from Texas A&M University. So this is a study of about 300 men and women over the age of 50. And I think this speaks very much to that cognitive, mental type development, mental health. In this study, they showed that 84% reported that of gardeners reported that they planned for the future. So this is a way of another way to say this would be is that they have long-term goals. They're always looking ahead. And if you think about that and you take it down to a simple form, just think about in your garden, right? Of course we are. We always do this. We have this plant. We just put in a climbing rose this year. It's the first time I've ever had a climbing rose. I'm waiting for that branch to get tall enough so I can tie it up to the next wire. I need it to spread and cover over a fence. Anticipation, looking forward to something, knowing I've got to go back and prune off the wayward branches on that rose because they're not going in the direction that I want. All of these things give us things to look forward to, and I think that's very, very important. Non-gardeners, much less future planning, also tend to reported that life is dull. They don't feel as energetic. They don't feel as satisfied with the goals that they have. So the director of horticulture who did this study said that the older population especially needs to be encouraged to get out there and to be involved in the natural world. And that can be gardening, and kind of our purposes today are gardening. But in my very last slide, I'll give you some other alternatives too if gardening just doesn't work for you. All right, so this is interesting, and I threw these in. I know these aren't exactly what we're going to be doing, but I just want to show you some practical examples of people who are doing this. So this is a location, not here, obviously. This is in Australia. We probably do have something like this, but I found this on a YouTube channel. I was just really, really impressed with it. So this is a place. It's just like one of our senior centers where people go during the day, and they have classes. So they did like a little program there, and they did potting up workshops. So they brought in flowers and help seniors pot up plants. They had garden walks around the facility. They brought in youth, kids, especially kids. In one example, they brought in kids that had chickens, and you can see the picture up there. And encourage more social connections, more interactions. They did a wreath making class, which is great for hand and eye coordination. They had sensory gardens. So these are the types of activities given at this particular location that kind of what we're talking about. Sometimes it's not just about going out and digging in the dirt. Sometimes it's these other types of things that, and I feel like maybe I'm talking to two different audiences with this presentation. Maybe you're looking at this for what you need to be doing for your own and your own garden. But I know for a fact that a lot of the people on this call are master gardeners. So waterways master gardeners could do outreach to even older members of the community. And I think this is a really, really good example of how programs like this have a very significant outcome and things that we should be looking at, right? So even though this is in Australia, it's still a really adaptable program that can be used just about anywhere. Another one, and I thought this was excellent too. This is in Norway. This is a place that's called Impulsitor. Both of these, by the way, you can go on YouTube, look them up, and watch their stories and see what this is like. But I thought this was very, very interesting. So this is a care farm, basically. If you, and we have a lot of people who do this, if you have aging parents and you're responsible for taking care of parents, especially parents who maybe have dementia, early Alzheimer's, those types of things. This is a working farm in Norway where the parents were dropped off. They stay there for a few hours during the day and they get to work on the farm. And so in this example, they're using a cider press. They're pressing apples and making cider. And the response that you read or that you listen to and hear how these people experience that, it puts them back in touch with gardening. It puts them back in touch with just the environment, growing, being outdoors, those types of things. And one of the comments I thought was very, very helpful or encouraging. The individual said, "I don't really remember what we did today, but I know it was a lot of fun." So I just think what these two things are showing us are we need to be thinking differently also about gardening as we age. And maybe it's not necessarily about us, maybe it's about those around us and other people that we can reach. Oops, let me go forward here. There. But if we do kind of hone in now and growing in our own lawns and our own gardens, a lot of the things that we used to do probably needs to be addressed. We need to address how we're going to do our regular gardening practices. I found this picture and I thought, oh my gosh, that just hurts me already looking at this. And I don't know if that hurts you too, but this is probably a practice here that needs to be changed. I don't know if he's taking the tree out or putting the tree in, but there's a lot of things that we can look at in just this picture alone and kind of break it down. And so that's what we're going to do next. Talking about tools, we're talking about gardening practices, we're talking about posture, the way you work in the garden. So that's what we'll look in these next few slides here. So you've heard this on many different programs and many different types of things that we do in life, but work smarter and not harder, right? So as we age, repetition is one of those big things that becomes more of a challenge, especially if you have weaker hands or weaker wrist or beginning to have some arthritis or you're more sensitive to that. Doing the same task over and over and over, and I'm thinking specifically of like hand pruning, deadheading, those types of things. It starts to become a little bit more of a challenge to do. Things start to hurt more, right? And so obviously some things that you can do, just changing hands, changing positions. But something that I think is repeated pretty often in some of the practices we'll cover in this presentation is how much time that we commit to doing these types of things. And so I know for me, I'm still kind of on that line about I want to start a task and I don't want to stop working at something until I finish that task, even if that means it's 2 or 3 hours of doing the same job over and over and over. The one that comes to my mind is trying to use hedge pruners and especially up on something really tall and maybe overhead. I'm learning now that I can't do that like I thought I could. You know, a few minutes of doing that and you wear out pretty fast. But that's okay. That's how we are adapting as we age, right? So we shorten our time. Maybe we allot 20 minutes and we're going to move on and do something else, and then we'll come back to that project again. Another one of those that we have to think about is force, and that's the exertion required to do a job. I wrote down a quote over here. If very great force is required, something is going to give, and it's usually going to be us. And this is not necessarily, it is, of course, but it's not just related to uh, aging. Uh, the first experience that I had with this that was a negative and lifelong experience is trying to pull out a somewhat dead boxwood shrub out of the ground at the age of about 23. From that point on, I've had a back problem because I um, over exerted and used force that I should not have been using. And so now I've got a bulged disc. And so anytime you start to work on something that's requiring a lot of force or in a weird position, then those things come back. So it's not just an age thing. It's finding ways to work those projects in a different way. And leverage is the big way that we can do that. There's a lot of new tools that are on the market that didn't exist years ago that will help you to dig or to move things. And we'll talk about tools in just a second. Keeping tools sharp, using two-handed tools, all of these are ways to help reduce that force that's required to be able to get a job done. And posture. I hate posture. I mean, I'm not very good at it, I guess. So I don't hate it. Obviously, there's a purpose for it, and we know lifting with our legs. That's a common statement. But other things that we need to do to sit up more straight, I have a tendency to slouch in chairs, and that's not good. And maybe you're guilty of that as well. I don't know, but there's some things that we need to be really, really mindful of as we're getting older. If we don't want to have as many issues and be able to garden longer, then we need to have good posture. And so I found this page. Yeah. I didn't put the link in here yet, but if you would go to the Utah State University on YouTube, they have these 4 posture training videos that I've watched through them, and I've already learned some things that I'm doing wrong. And this would be I would highly recommend that you go check these out. Some safe lifting techniques for gardeners, using the pivot technique when gardening to help save your back, raking safely when you're gardening, shoveling safely when you're gardening. They seem so basic to read these titles, but when you go and you watch how they walk you through and break it down, it's very, very helpful. So, yes, gardening as we age, we're going to have better posture if we want to keep gardening longer. All right, let's look at some of the ways we can adapt the tools. So, looking at different gardening tools, lightweight tools are generally easier to use. That would make sense. And longer handles increase leverage and decrease stooping. If you were to go and purchase, I think I've got that on the next slide. Let me go here first. Let's talk about something like a garden hoe. A regular garden hoe is only 54 inches long. I looked on Lowe's before this presentation just to see, and every single tool that I was looking at was 54 inches long. A 54-inch long handle is going to require you to kind of hinge over to be able to use that, a garden hoe or whatever that might be, a garden rake. Um, they're harder to find. You can get them online. We happen to have an Amish supply store, and they sell them. Basically, garden hose or garden rakes that have a 72-inch long handle, so an additional almost 20 inches of length. And what that allows you to do is to stand up more upright. And then using one of the posture videos that I just mentioned, you can stand in a specific direction so that you're not putting all this pressure on one hip, and you'll have a much easier time of raking or using a garden hoe in the garden. Okay. Let me go back to the other slide real quick. and then we'll come back to see the smaller sizes because sometimes smaller tools have their place as well. But first, so I'm about handle length first, and then also smaller blades and tool heads. So we're all used to, and I can't see myself, but hopefully you can see this camera. We're all used to a garden hoe head, something like this, right? This is a lot of metal. Now this is a kid's tool, but that's a lot of metal to push around. And there are much smaller blades that come on garden hose. There's a stirrup hoe that's kind of a metal loop. There is these little triangular ones that's not much bigger than this that come on the end of these things. And you can also buy those heads and buy the handle separate and just put it on yourself. So consider you reducing the amount of weight that a tool has so that it's less stress on you to hold it and to move it. Another thing, and people don't think about this very often, but when you buy a garden hoe at the store, this is not sharp at all. This is dull, and this is how they all come. So the first thing you need to do is to get this sharpened, either with a file or like a grinding wheel, or take it somewhere and get somebody to sharpen it, because that will reduce the amount of force that it takes to use a tool like that. And pretty much every type of gardening tool with a blade on it is going to need some sort of sharpening. Okay, so moving on, considering tool handles, different types of grips. Got some pictures of those. When it's possible, two hands are better than one for some of your hand gardening tools. Springs, I use Felco. I've also used, I can't remember the other pruners, but especially when you're using certain types of pruners, that's repetitive task over and over. You need a good quality set that have an excellent spring mechanism. A lot of them will rebound a lot faster, so you're not having to exert any additional force with your hands on the closing and the opening. As you just close and it's bounced back, that's what you're looking for. That reduces that risk so that you can do that task for a longer period of time. It's also time to start looking at very specific purpose tools. I know at our Master Gardener meetings after like a garden expo, Nashville used to have a big garden expo. It seems like every time that we would go, somebody would come back with a brand new tool that's made to do a specific purpose. And at least when I was younger, I always thought, well, that seems wasteful. You can just use a shovel. It'll do the same thing. Yes, it will do the same thing, but it's going to take more force. It's going to be heavier. And you're going to wear out faster. So maybe it is time, and there's probably a lot of truth in looking at these more specific purpose tools to get different types of jobs done. I'll show you an example of that too. And sometimes the best tool you got is just using your hands, and that's okay also. All right, you saw this slide already, but basically we're talking about using, if you're going to be in a standing position, to reduce stooping, bending over, you can get a longer handle and put that on your tools head piece, or you can just buy a longer tool, but they're a little bit difficult to find. If you're going to be seated, so let's say you're working in a garden, you're going to sit on one of these benches. I don't know if this will show up in the camera either. How many of you have one of these? Hopefully a lot of people have checked these out. These are very nice. If you need to sit in the garden and work, this is a kid's hoe. This is not quite the right length. For two hands, it's a little bit short at 30, what did it say on here? 32 inches, 48 inches would be a little bit better because you could back it up. And that would be this would be a good tool to work from a sitting position, right? If you're going to be seated like on the side of a flower bed or a raised bed, and you're going to just be using one hand, the little tools that we buy at the box stores are such a short handle. They make them a little bit longer so that you can put your hand here and let it rest against your forearm and get a little bit more leverage and not wear out as fast. Here's some of those unique tools that you may want to try out. These cut and hold pruners are excellent, and they're all over the price ranges for different ones. But if your objective is to cut and not drop it or not have to use both hands, this would allow you to cut it. The tool itself will hold it, like an example of this rose, so that you can bring it back to you. We've had tools like this at the office before, and I don't know if you have used these weed pullers. Some people really like them. The example with this picture is on dandelion. I don't know if that's going to work. If you break that root, you're still going to get dandelion. So, but maybe with other weeds, that might be a possibility. Gripping aids. A lot of the newer tools, hand tools, are going to have some sort of foam rubber, but you can also buy grip tape. If yours didn't come that way, you can buy grip tape for what they sell for baseball bats and just wrap it up and give some softness to that. Of course, gardening gloves are good. Just looking for tools with molded handles that are more ergonomic, and utensil holders. So if you're going to use one of these types of benches, I don't have it on here, but it comes with a little side pocket so you can keep those tools close to hand and you're not always overstretching. It seems like to me, anytime that an injury occurs to my body in the garden, it's always now, it doesn't seem to be when I'm lifting something too heavy. It's always the simple thing like, oh, I dropped that. I'm going to grab it and I bend wrong. So keeping your tools closest to you will help to reduce some of those problems. Oh, this is great. So these are accessory handles. This was new to me. I didn't even know these were a thing. I put one of the brands on here. I'm not promoting this brand over another. If you go on Amazon, you'll find all different types. But basically, it's a way to add one more handle to any tool that you already have. So you see the picture is a garden rake, and they've attached a tool like this one. It just screws on and locks in place, and now you've got two places to hold that tool. And it allows you to hold a different position because now you can hold it down like this instead of some sort of a weird shape like this to do some raking. So it just makes good sense. I had a picture, I didn't put it in here, but it was somebody's garage full of all these garden tools, and they had one of these handle pieces on everything that they owned. But that might be a little excessive. You can move these things around. Just one's probably all that you need. Number one complaint, at least out of the gardeners that I know, is that their knees are shot, right? Their knees, they got to get knee replacement surgery. So protect your knees. Your knees need your help. These little garden benches are great. You can flip them over and use them as a knee pad. You can buy all different manner of these strap-on type knee pads, or just carrying like one of those bleacher seat things around with you in the garden is another good way to protect those knees. They will wear out a lot faster. Okay, the next thing we can look at, so we talked about adapting the tools that you work with. Now we can talk about adapting the garden itself. And one of the things that's not a secret when it comes to gardening from this channel, I'm sure you've heard it many, many times. You probably will hear it many more times, is that we love raised bed gardening. Raised bed gardening is where it's at. We talk about all the pros of this, less weeds, earlier access in the garden, but let's look at it from the standpoint of we're getting older. And so this gets the soil up to where we are, right? We can raise the level higher, and that is great. And so looking at some different sizes, some of the size restrictions, I don't know if restrictions is the right words, maybe guidelines is better. A raised bed that's 18 inches or so gives you a nice height to be able to sit on the edge of the bed. It's a good height also if you've got children or grandchildren that's helping you in the garden. It's easy access for them, but it gets it up high enough that you're not all the way down on the ground. You have a surface to sit on, especially if you build it like in this picture with a edge that's wide enough to sit on. If you want to use one of these garden benches and sit down while you're working in the garden, then the goal would be something about 2 feet tall. That would give you a nice level that you can reach from a sitting position. And then if you're going to build it for standing up, but that you don't have to bend as much, then 30, 32 inches or so is going to be a good height for that. Of course, the downside to all of these is the higher you go, the more material it's going to take, the more soil it's going to take to fill up one of these beds. And that is the challenge for raising it. But there are some other alternatives as well. This is a project that I built probably 15 years ago with my kids. And he's given it a drink of water. But basically, these are these tabletop gardens. You probably have seen something like this similar online. Very simple construction. This is all 2x4. You could build this out of 2x6s for a little bit more rooting depth. This is great for something like lettuces or small, shallow rooted herbs would be something like what you would grow. In this picture, it shows tomatoes growing in maybe a slightly bigger one, maybe a 2x6. I don't think that's enough space. I don't know how they're going to make that, but certainly lettuces and smaller crops. This would be great. They're very simple to put together, just screws and 2x4s or 2x6s. On the bottom of this, if you were to flip it over, window screening is laid out, and then you just use staples or tacks of some kind to hold all that window screening in place. Fill it up with potting mix, and you're ready to plant. Works really, really well. You can build it out of untreated lumber. It'll probably last 5 years or so, and then you can switch it out. Of course, don't forget container gardening. We always talk about container gardening and the tomatoes or flowers or anything that you want to grow. There's all types of containers for that. Obviously, the bigger container, the less it's going to dry out. Just as a reminder, if you're going to be building any of these types of things, raised beds, tabletop gardens, or containers, you can't just go digging up soil out of the ground and sticking it in that. That's a bad choice. You need to get some good growing media to fill up those beds because you're going to increase bringing in insects. You're going to increase soil-borne diseases. You don't want to do that. Don't start out in a handicap. You want to start out with good soil. Watering too. Containers, that's probably the biggest downside. Now, if you're planting in raised beds on the ground, then this is less of an issue. But anytime we get that soil elevated or we put it in a pot and more of the surface is exposed to the heat of the summer, it's going to dry out a lot faster, right? So it's got to have good drainage in the bottom so that you can water it pretty frequently. And making sure that you don't overwater it, although it's kind of difficult to do. As long as it's got good drainage, it should be fine. This slide is just an example of something we have that we've been learning a lot about this year. We have engineer at UK, Steve Higgins. He's done these classes across the state at different county offices. These are self-watering containers. So what we're looking at are these big, like 20-gallon containers. And at the bottom of each of these, he's put in that PVC drain pipe with the perforations in it, the holes that you stick on the end of your downspout. So you put a circle of those in the bottom and a couple across the middle. And then you put a fill tube which is just solid, like PVC pipe from plumbing, construction, those types of things. And you run it down into the black pipe at the bottom, put some landscape fabric over the top, and then your layers of soil. And you fill this container through the PVC pipe, and it fills up all of the drain pipe at the bottom and holds a layer of water there. And so as your roots grow, they reach out until they reach to the water. You do all your fertilizing through the fill tube. And in this case, you don't add drainage except for an overflow spout. You want to hold the water. And this is really, if you're someone who likes to travel, you're gone a lot, this is a great alternative because you can fill this thing up and it will hold enough water, usually for about a week, before you have to get more additional water into that. You can do this in a raised bed too. It's quite a bit more expensive to build it in a raised bed, but this is a relatively inexpensive way to build kind of a self-watering container system. I just thought I'd stick that in there to let you see that as well. Also think about what you're going to put in those containers. I mentioned that tomato that they showed. I don't know if that would work in a tabletop, but there are several varieties of plants that you can find these in our vegetable guide, the UK vegetable guide, that talk about plants that are better for containers than they are for the ground. So this just shows a couple of things you may have never seen before. This is Thumbelina carrots. They're not brand new. They've been out for a little while, but they're very small, rounded, more like radish shape. And then this is a very small cucumber called fanfare that would grow even in a small container. So there are some alternatives out there. And then finally, as we start to wrap this up here, we're talking about adapting our tools, adapting our garden, and then finally adapting our expectations. And I thought this slide kind of just shows I don't know if you're like me and you look at the size of garden that this guy has, that's a lot. That's very overwhelming to look at all of what has to be done. And maybe this is what you have done for years, but I would say that a point will come when this will be overwhelming. And so we need to think about uh, what is what is the new normal. So gardening is an exercise, so we should treat it like an exercise, right? It's good for us. We know that. We've established that. There's a lot of benefits to still gardening. But maybe we can't garden as much as we used to. Maybe we need to reduce that or scale back. There was a picture, I opted not to put that one in here, but it was someone's front yard, and they had not a huge design. This was not vegetables, this was for ornamentals, but they had a couple of ornamental grasses, they had some black-eyed Susans, and they had just common things that you would see. And that's their garden, and that's what they work on. And that can be enough. It can be enough to keep us active and keep us out in the garden. So remember to alternate tasks frequently, taking frequent breaks, especially if you're working overhead, whether you're harvesting something or pruning something. One of the guidelines that I saw said to maybe limit garden time outdoors for less than 2 hours a day. I know we saw some other studies earlier about how much per week, but generally, if you're a gardener, you're outside in your garden a lot. So limiting gardening time to less than 2 hours a day. This is not new for gardeners as we age, but younger, I would say the younger we are, the less importance that we put on covering up from the summer sun. And I know that for me, anyways, just a little ball cap doesn't cut it anymore. I usually wear a nice wide hat when I'm out mowing. I haven't switched to wearing long sleeves like this guy is because I don't know if he has the humidity that Kentucky has, but it probably makes a lot of sense to keep that sun off your arms as well. And then stretch breaks. If you go to the gym, there's a good bet you probably warm up before you start to exercise, whatever that exercise is, just doing some stretches. But I'm going to bet that nobody does that when we go out to the garden. I'm going out to mow the yard, so I'm going to spend 2 or 3 minutes doing some stretches. Not a thing. People don't think about that. But again, going back to the first point, gardening is exercise. So that becomes more and more important. We need to stretch and we'll have less issues in the garden if we do. Um, and then just finally engaging outside the garden activities. So maybe gardening, vegetable gardening, flower gardening, and those types of things is becoming such a thing that you can't keep doing it, right? And that could happen. But are there other ways to be involved in the garden or being outdoors? And of course there are. So just as a reminder, what are some other things that we could do, right? Horticultural crafts, just doing things that involve nature crafts, those types of things. Or maybe it's flower designing. It doesn't mean you have to grow the flowers, but maybe you enjoy making arrangements and giving those to friends. It counts, right? Sensory garden. So I don't know how many of you jumped into the succulent craze that I think is still going on, but just having these thick, fleshy looking things or fuzzy things that you can grow on a windowsill. Taking cooking classes, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but if we're talking about herbs and we're talking about fresh vegetables, then let's make it count. Um, Maybe a total different way to look at this is just being outdoors. So that might be birding. I don't know how many of you use iNaturalist or Seek. It's an app you can put on your phone that you hold it up and it tells you what you're looking at. I like iNaturalist the best because they also have these challenges that you can participate in. So they call them BioBlitz, and for different communities, they'll have you going out and try to identify as many, not necessarily identify, take a picture of as many different types of flowers as you can, right? And so you're trying to meet this challenge. You're trying to get to 50 or something like that. Maybe gardening or being outdoors is a challenge or something you might like to do with others. And I would say garden tours. Our master gardeners love to go places. They want to take a garden trip more than I have time to go on garden trips. And so we need to look into doing more of those types of things. And at least in Kentucky, we also have the Master Naturalist program, which doesn't require you to go anywhere. You can do gardening through your computer. You can join a weekly Zoom training when that's offered and learn more about the plants and the flora and the fauna of Kentucky, our soil types and all those types of things. And so I think that's another way to stay involved and be engaged in the natural world if gardening isn't going to fit as much as we get older. So I encourage you to look at those two. All right. Well, that's what I have to share with you today. This is my contact. If you had any questions for me, I'm happy to share any of my resources or any of the links that didn't show up in this presentation. And I will stop there.